Some people arrive at Harvard. Sophie James earned her way there. That distinction sounds small until you understand what it cost. Until you understand the scholarship applications written at a kitchen table in a Dorchester apartment while her mother worked a double shift at the hospital. Until you understand the AP classes taken before sunrise and the standardized tests retaken, until the scores reflected what Sophie already knew about herself, that she was not going to be the girl who almost made it. She was going to be the girl who did. She arrived at Harvard Law at 18 with 2 suitcases, 1 full scholarship, and the specific quiet confidence of someone who has been told repeatedly that rooms like this were not built for people like her, and has decided to inhabit them anyway. She was right about the confidence. The rooms were not built for her. She built herself for the rooms. First year was the architecture of survival, learning the language of people who had been prepared for Harvard by schools that existed specifically to prepare people for Harvard. Sophie had been prepared by necessity, which turned out to be the better teacher. While her classmates had polish, she had precision. While they had connections, she had clarity. While they networked at family-funded cocktail events, she was in the law library at midnight with 3 highlighters and a coffee that had been cold for 2 hours. This is where she was most herself. The library. Specifically the northeast reading room on the 3rd floor, where the light was best in the afternoon, and the foot traffic was lowest after 9 p.m. and Sophie could spread her case materials across an entire table without apology and think without interruption. This is also where she was, on a Tuesday afternoon in October of her 2nd year, when Nathan Cole sat down across from her without asking. He was 24, business postgraduate, dark hair, easy confidence, the specific unhurried manner of someone who had never once in his life questioned whether he belonged in a room. He was from Boston, old Boston, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because the city already knew. His family name was on a building 2 blocks from campus. Sophie had walked past it without noticing, which would have surprised him if she'd mentioned it, which she never did. He sat down, opened his case studies, and said nothing. Sophie continued her work. They existed in parallel silence for 40 minutes. Then he looked at her highlighted casebook, the 3 colors, marginal notes in 2 different inks, a system so precise it looked architectural, and said simply, "You brief cases like you're going to argue them yourself." She looked up. "I am going to argue them myself," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the specific expression of someone recalibrating. "Nathan Cole," he said. "I know," she said, "the building." He laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, the laugh of someone who has just been surprised by a person they did not see coming. Sophie went back to her notes. She did not tell him that she had been aware of him for 3 weeks, that she had noticed the way he listened in seminars, fully, without performing attention, that she had read 2 of his published papers and found them frustratingly good. She said none of this. She had learned early that the most powerful position in any room was knowing more than you revealed. She was 18 years old, and she was already the most dangerous kind of attorney. The kind who prepared. Margaret Cole arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in April. Sophie had never met her before. She knew of her. Nathan spoke of his mother the way people speak of weather, as a constant that shaped everything without being examined directly. Elegant, decisive, the kind of woman who had managed the Cole family's social architecture for 30 years with the specific quiet authority of someone who understood that real power never announced itself. She knocked twice, precisely. Sophie opened the door and Margaret Cole stood in the hallway of her graduate apartment, looking exactly like what she was. A woman who had dressed carefully for a conversation she had been planning for longer than the visit implied. "Sophie," she said warmly, "I hope this isn't a terrible time." It was. Sophie had a brief due Thursday, but Margaret was already inside, not aggressively, simply, the way certain people enter spaces as though invitation is a formality rather than a requirement. She accepted tea she didn't drink. She complimented the apartment in the specific way of someone noting its smallness while praising its tidiness. She asked about Sophie's coursework with the genuine curiosity of someone who respected achievement while cataloging its origins. She was warm. She was specific. She was, Sophie would think later, the most prepared opposing counsel she had ever faced before she understood she was in a proceeding. Then Margaret set down her untouched tea. "I want to speak to you honestly," she said, "because I think you deserve honesty more than comfort." Sophie said nothing. She had learned that silence was the most powerful response available when you did not yet know the shape of what was coming. Margaret's argument was surgical. Nathan was not simply joining the family firm. He was assuming its chairmanship within 18 months, a transition that the firm's 3 largest clients had been preparing for with specific expectations about the Cole family's public presentation. These clients were old institutions. They had relationships with the Cole family that predated Nathan's birth and would outlast any individual within it. Their continued partnership required a continuity of image, of legacy, of the specific kind of visible stability that Nathan's new role demanded. Sophie's background was not, Margaret said carefully, a failing. It was simply, she paused, chose her words with the precision of someone who had rehearsed them, an incompatibility, with the timing, with the requirements, with what Nathan was being asked to carry publicly for the next 30 years. Sophie felt the specific cold clarity of someone being told a truth wrapped inside a lie, and not yet being certain which part was which. Then Margaret opened her bag. A card, a name, a London firm, one of the most prestigious in the world. A clerkship already arranged through Margaret's connections, career-defining, independent, entirely Sophie's. "This is not a condition," Margaret said. "It is an opportunity, one I believe you have earned entirely on your own merits." She stood, she smoothed her coat. "I think you already know," she said quietly, "that loving someone is not always enough to make the timing right." She left. Sophie sat at her kitchen table with the card in front of her. Outside her window, Cambridge continued its ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Students crossed the yard. A bicycle bell rang somewhere below. The world moved with complete indifference to the specific stillness of one apartment where a 20-year-old woman sat across from a business card and felt the architecture of her future being quietly, reasonably, devastatingly redesigned by someone who had called it kindness. She did not call Nathan. She told herself she needed to think. The card sat on the table. She did not move it. Speech balloon drop card. In the comments, the moment you felt what Margaret actually did in that room. She called him on a Thursday evening. Not because she was ready. Because waiting until she was ready would mean never calling at all, and she understood with the specific clarity of someone who had been thinking about nothing else for 9 days, that the longer she held the card on her kitchen table, the more it became a decision she had already made without admitting it. She had accepted the London position that morning. She had not told herself why. She had used Margaret's language because Margaret's language was the only language available, the timing, the career, the independence, the opportunity she had earned on her own merits. She arranged these words in the order that made the most sense and called them a choice, and sat with them until they felt like one. Then she called Nathan. He answered on the second ring the way he always answered, immediately, warmly, the specific ease of someone who had never once let a call from her go to voicemail. The sound of his voice undid 3 days of careful construction in approximately 4 seconds. She rebuilt it. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. She heard him still on the other end. The specific quality of Nathan's attention, the way he listened with his entire self, the quality she had noticed in seminars before she had words for why she was noticing, arrived through the phone line and made what she was about to do considerably harder. She told him she had accepted a position in London. She told him it was a career-defining opportunity. She told him the long distance was unsustainable across an ocean. She told him the timing was wrong, not the relationship, not him, the timing. She used every word Margaret had given her, and several she constructed herself, and she delivered them with the professional composure of someone arguing a case they had prepared thoroughly and believed not at all. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Sophie." "Nathan." "Is this about my mother?" The question arrived like a structural beam she had not accounted for. She felt it in her chest before she processed it in her mind, the specific physical sensation of a lie forming in a body that does not want to tell it. Her hand tightened on the phone. Outside her Cambridge window, the evening had gone dark and ordinary and completely indifferent. "No," she said. One word. The most expensive word of her life. Nathan was quiet again. A different quality of quiet this time. The silence of someone receiving an answer they will spend years trying to believe. "Okay," he said finally. Not okay as acceptance. Okay as the specific sound of someone deciding to take a word at face value because the alternative, that his mother had done something he could not yet afford to examine, cost more than he had available. She heard it in that one syllable. She said nothing. They talked for 11 more minutes about logistics and timing, and the things people talk about when they are avoiding the conversation inside the conversation. Then Nathan said he had an early morning. She said she understood. He said he hoped London was everything she needed it to be. She said thank you. She hung up. She sat in the dark for a long time. In Boston, Nathan put his phone down on his desk, his father's desk, soon to be his, and looked at nothing in particular. Then he picked it up again and called his mother. Margaret answered immediately. "Did you speak to Sophie?" Nathan asked. "Of course not," Margaret said. The warmth in her voice was specific and immediate and completely prepared. Nathan said, "Okay," in the voice of someone choosing belief, because the alternative was a door he was not yet ready to open. 3 years began. Boston received Nathan Cole the way Boston receives its own. Without ceremony, without question, with the specific assumption of belonging that old money cities extend to old money families as naturally as weather. He arrived back from Harvard in June with a postgraduate degree, a broken relationship he had decided to understand as ambition, and the particular focused energy of a man who has converted something unresolved into forward momentum. He was 27 years old. He had work to do. The Cole family firm occupied 4 floors of a Federal Street building, whose address Nathan had known since childhood the way other children knew their home addresses, as the coordinates of where his life was always going to eventually arrive. His father greeted him on the first morning with the quiet satisfaction of a man watching an inevitability unfold on schedule. His mother greeted him with the specific warmth of someone who had arranged the circumstances and was now welcoming the outcome. Nathan noticed neither. He was already working. This is what he became in those 3 years: excellent. Genuinely, specifically, impressively excellent at the work. His clients trusted him with the specific trust reserved for attorneys who listen completely before they speak. His father's partners respected him with the particular respect of people watching someone earn a legacy rather than simply inherit it. The firm's revenue grew. The client relationships deepened. Every measurable indicator of professional success pointed in the same direction. Upward. Always upward. The personal indicators pointed somewhere quieter. He stopped going to Harvard alumni events. Too many familiar faces asking familiar questions about familiar people. He declined the social introductions his mother arranged with the specific patience of someone who understood what she was arranging and had decided he was not available for it. He worked late not because the work required it, but because the office was the one place where the explanation he had built for himself. Sophie chose London. Sophie chose ambition. Sophie made a reasonable adult decision about her future, held its shape without requiring maintenance. Outside the office, it required considerable maintenance. CLAIRE WETSON arrived in month 4. Margaret had selected her, efficient, discreet, Harvard-educated, the specific professional profile of someone designed to manage Nathan's world with minimal friction. Claire was 26 and observant in the particular way of people who speak less than they notice. She managed Nathan's schedule, his correspondence, his access, and within 6 months his professional life ran through her with the smooth inevitability of a well-engineered system. She also watched him. Not intrusively. Simply, the way perceptive people in close professional proximity watch someone they are quietly concerned about. She watched Nathan arrive earlier every month and stay later every quarter. She watched him decline the 3rd and 4th personal introduction with the same pleasant professional deflection he used on opposing counsel. She watched him keep one photograph in his desk drawer, visible only when the drawer was open, turned face down, never displayed, and close the drawer with the specific decisiveness of someone ending a thought they had not intended to begin. She filed these observations without acting on them. She had been at the firm for 18 months when she found the anomaly. A correspondence archive audit, routine, administrative, the kind of filing task that produced nothing except organized records. Margaret's correspondence from 3 years prior. A letter to a London firm. The language formal and specific in a way that had nothing to do with coal industry's business, and everything to do with something personal and arranged and deliberately quiet. Claire read it once. She closed the file. She returned to her desk and continued the audit with the professional composure of someone who had just found something significant and needed to decide what kind of person she intended to be about it. She filed the letter back in the archive. She did not delete it. She did not mention it. She opened a private document on her personal laptop that evening and began noting dates, Margaret's interferences, Nathan's schedule anomalies, the small, consistent pattern of a woman managing her son's access to his own life. She did not know yet what she would do with the document. She knew she would do something. The case file arrived on Nathan's desk on a Tuesday morning in March. Opposing firm, London-based, lead attorney assigned. The name meaning nothing to him because it had been 3 years, and he had worked very hard to make certain names mean nothing to him. He passed it to his legal team. He walked toward the boardroom. He did not know who was walking toward it from the other direction. Sophie arrived 12 minutes early. This was professional habit. She arrived early to every proceeding, every deposition, every client meeting, because the person who arrives first controls the room's initial atmosphere, and Sophie had understood since her first Harvard seminar that atmosphere was half the argument. She set her materials at the opposing counsel's end of the long conference table, arranged her notepad parallel to the table's edge, and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Boston skyline. She had not been back to Boston in 3 years. The city looked exactly the same. She turned from the window when the boardroom door opened. Coal Industries' legal team entered first, 2 junior attorneys carrying files with the specific urgency of people who had been briefed thoroughly and were performing their briefing. Then a senior partner she recognized from the firm's public profile. Then 2 executives whose names she knew from the case materials. Then Nathan. He was mid-conversation with the senior partner when he entered, dark suit, measured stride, the specific contained authority of someone who had spent 3 years becoming exactly what this room expected. He was looking at a document in his hand. The senior partner said something. Nathan responded without looking up. Then he looked up. The document stayed in his hand. Everything else stopped. Not visibly, the room continued its preparatory motion around them, attorneys finding seats, files being distributed, water glasses filled with the anonymous efficiency of a corporate proceeding organizing itself. Nobody noticed. The pause lasted approximately 2 seconds and was invisible to everyone in the room except the 2 people inside it. Sophie held his gaze for exactly as long as professionalism required. Then she looked at her notepad. "Good morning," she said to the room. The meeting proceeded. She argued well, she always argued well, but there was a specific quality to her precision that morning, the sharpened focus of someone who has converted an enormous personal disruption into professional energy because the alternative is not available. She presented her client's position clearly and without aggression. She asked 3 questions that the coal industry's legal team would spend the following week answering. She took notes in the 2-ink system Nathan had noticed in a Harvard library 6 years ago. He noticed it again now. She knew he noticed. She did not acknowledge that she knew. Nathan spoke twice, once to clarify a procedural point, once to request a document extension. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, measured, specific. The voice of someone who chose words the way she chose case strategy, deliberately, without waste. Both times he spoke, she wrote something on her notepad. Both times she wrote something, he looked briefly at what she wrote. She had written nothing relevant. She needed her hand to be doing something that was not shaking. The meeting concluded at 11:40 a.m. Attorneys gathered materials. Handshakes crossed the table with professional neutrality. Sophie shook the senior partner's hand, the junior attorneys, the executives. Then Nathan was in front of her with his hand extended, and his expression composed with the specific careful composure of a man who has had 3 years of practice managing his face, and is currently using every minute of it. She shook his hand. "Ms. James," he said. "Mr. Cole," she said. His hand was exactly as she remembered. She released it in the time that professionalism required, and not 1 second longer, and walked out of the boardroom with her materials under her arm and her notepad against her chest, and the 2-ink system pressed against her sternum like something she was keeping warm. In the elevator, she stood very still. The doors closed. She exhaled once, completely, fully, the specific exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for the duration of a proceeding, and can only release it when the walls stop having eyes. Across the building in his office, Nathan stood at his window, looking at the same Boston skyline Sophie had looked at 12 minutes before the meeting began. Claire appeared in his doorway with his afternoon schedule. He did not turn around. "Clear my 4 o'clock," he said. "Already done," Claire said. He turned then, the specific look of a man registering that his assistant has anticipated something he hadn't yet expressed. Claire's expression was professionally neutral. She had seen Sophie James walk into the boardroom. She had watched Nathan's face for 2 seconds. She had cleared the 4 o'clock before the meeting ended. That evening she opened her private document and added 3 lines. Then she opened the correspondence archive on the firm's internal system. She found Margaret's letter. She read it one more time. She opened a new document and began to type, not notes this time. A decision. The case had a name. Meridian Holdings versus Coal Industries. A corporate challenge involving a subsidiary acquisition that had been contested for 18 months before Sophie's firm entered the proceedings. It was complex, well-documented, and genuinely important to both parties. It would take 6 months to resolve. It required regular meetings, document exchanges, depositions, and the specific sustained professional proximity of 2 legal teams who needed to be in the same rooms repeatedly for an extended period. Sophie had worked harder cases. She had never worked a harder situation. The professional dimension was manageable. She was excellent at her work, and excellence had always been her most reliable shelter. She prepared thoroughly. She argued precisely. She met every deadline and anticipated every counterfiling with the focused competence that had made her the lead attorney on a case of this size at 28. Her supervising partner described her performance in month 2 as the best sustained legal work he had seen from an attorney her age in 11 years of practice. She received this assessment and returned to her desk and prepared for the Thursday deposition. The Thursday deposition involved Nathan. He sat across the conference table in the deposition suite with his legal counsel and answered questions with the specific measured precision of someone who had been thoroughly prepared, and was also, Sophie recognized this, because she knew how to read a person who was working very hard to be unreadable, somewhere else simultaneously. His answers were accurate and efficient, and revealed nothing beyond what was asked. He looked at Sophie when she questioned him and nowhere else. She looked at him when she had to and nowhere else. This was the texture of 6 months. Boardroom meetings where both of them argued with complete professional commitment and 0 personal acknowledgement. Deposition sessions where Sophie asked and Nathan answered with the specific courtesy of 2 people who had decided that professional respect was the only register available. Document exchanges conducted through junior attorneys. The occasional corridor encounter navigated with a nod and a continued stride. The architecture of managed proximity. Claire observed all of it. She watched Nathan prepare for every Meridian meeting with an attention to detail that exceeded what the case required, the additional preparation of someone who needed to be not just ready but impenetrable. She watched Sophie across the conference table with the specific awareness of someone who had read a 3-year-old letter and understood what Sophie did not yet know she was sitting across from. She added entries to her private document. She waited. She was waiting for discovery. Discovery arrived in month 4. Standard procedure: Sophie's firm requested Coal Industries correspondence archives, document batches running to thousands of pages, assigned to junior attorneys for initial review. The process was routine. The volume was large. The significance of any individual document within it was statistically minimal. JESSICA Park, second-year associate, thorough. The specific careful diligence of someone who understood that junior attorney attention to detail was the foundation on which senior attorney arguments were built. Flagged an anomaly on a Tuesday afternoon in the 4th month. A letter, 3 years old. Margaret Cole to a London law firm. The language formal and personal simultaneously, not corporate correspondence. Something arranged quietly between a woman with connections and a firm willing to honor them. Jessica did not understand its full significance. She placed it on Sophie's desk with a yellow adhesive note. Not sure if relevant. Margaret Cole to London firm, personal not corporate, flagged for your review. Sophie returned from a deposition at 6 p.m. The office was quiet. Her junior team had left. The Boston evening pressed against the windows with the specific gray quality of a New England spring that had not yet decided to commit to warmth. She sat at her desk. She processed 3 emails. She reviewed 2 filing confirmations. Then she picked up the flagged document. The letterhead was Margaret Cole's personal stationery, cream, embossed, the specific material weight of correspondence designed to communicate the sender's position before a word was read. The date was 3 years and 2 months ago. April, Cambridge. The month Nathan had returned to Boston and Sophie had received a visit she had never told anyone about. She read the first line, then the second. Then she put the letter flat on her desk with both palms pressed against it. The involuntary gesture of someone whose body needs to make contact with the thing that has just reorganized their understanding of the last 3 years. The office was very quiet. Outside the window, Boston continued its gray, indifferent evening. Sophie sat completely still for a long time. She read it 4 times. Not because the language was unclear. Margaret Cole wrote with the specific precision of someone who had spent 30 years communicating in rooms where imprecision was expensive. Every sentence was exactly what it intended to be. Sophie understood the letter completely on the first reading. She read it 4 times because understanding and accepting are different processes and the distance between them. In this specific instance, with this specific letter, on this specific Tuesday evening in a Boston office, with both palms pressed flat against cream embossed stationery, was approximately 3 years wide. The letter was addressed to the senior partner of the London firm. It was dated April. The same April, the same Cambridge, the same month Margaret had appeared in Sophie's doorway with untouched tea and carefully chosen words, and a business card placed on a kitchen table like a hand of cards laid down by someone who knew they held the better position. The language was formal and specific and devastating, in the particular way of documents not intended to be read by the people they concerned. Margaret had not simply suggested Sophie for the clerkship. She had arranged it, contacted the firm's senior partner through a mutual connection, outlined Sophie's academic profile with genuine accuracy, Because Margaret Cole was not a woman who needed to lie about facts when the framing of facts was sufficient, and requested that the position be offered with the specific terms most likely to be accepted by a scholarship student with Sophie's professional ambitions. The letter named those terms precisely. It also named the reason. Not in cruel language, not in the vocabulary of dismissal or condescension. In the careful, reasonable language of a woman who believed every word she was writing. Nathan's transition, the firm's clients, the Cole family's public requirements, the specific incompatibility of Sophie's background with what Nathan was being asked to carry. Margaret had written it down. She had committed to paper the argument she had delivered in Sophie's apartment and called it a kindness, and sent it to London and arranged a career, and called that a kindness too, and nowhere, in 4 paragraphs of precise formal language, had she considered the possibility that she was wrong. Sophie sat with this for a long time. The specific experience of reading it was layered in a way she had not anticipated, not simple rage, not simple grief, but something more complex and less manageable than either. Because the 3 years were real. The London career was real. She had built something genuine and earned, and entirely hers in a city she had not chosen, and had learned to love anyway. The attorney she had become in those 3 years was not a lesser version of who she might have been. She was a different version. Forged in a different circumstance, shaped by a choice that had not been entirely her own. Both things were true simultaneously. The career was real, and it was also built on a lie. She was genuinely excellent, and she had also been maneuvered. Holding both truths in the same hands at the same time was the most legally and personally complex thing Sophie James had ever been asked to do, and she had passed the bar examination in 2 jurisdictions. Then the professional dimension arrived. Because Sophie was an attorney, and attorneys, the good ones, the ones who had been in the law library at midnight with 3 highlighters since they were 18, did not encounter significant documents without immediately and involuntarily assessing their evidentiary value. The letter was evidence. Not of corporate wrongdoing. It had no bearing on Meridian Holdings versus Cole Industries, no connection to the subsidiary acquisition, no relevance to the case she was being paid to argue. But it existed within active legal proceedings. It had been produced in a discovery batch. Its chain of custody was documented. Its authenticity was unimpeachable. Margaret's personal stationery, her signature, her words in her hand. Sophie could use it. Not in court, its relevance was personal, not legal, but in deposition, in negotiation, as leverage in a case where the Cole family's reputation was already under examination, as the specific kind of pressure that made settlements happen faster and on more favorable terms. She could use Nathan's mother's betrayal as a professional weapon. She sat with that possibility until it clarified itself into something she could name. She could. She would not. The distinction arrived not as a moral calculation, but as a physical certainty. The specific bodily knowledge of someone who understands exactly who they are and what they are not capable of becoming regardless of what they have been handed. She placed the letter in her briefcase. She closed the clasp. She sat in the quiet office for another hour thinking about Nathan across a boardroom table with his composed face, and his 3 years of wrong information, and the specific question of what she owed him, now that she held the answer he had been living without. She reached for her phone. She put it back down. She was not ready. Tomorrow she would arrive at her desk and find something that made ready irrelevant. Sophie arrived at the office at 7:43 a.m. She had not slept well. Not badly, not the restless catastrophizing of someone in crisis, but the specific interrupted sleep of someone whose mind had been conducting a proceeding in the background all night, and had not reached a verdict by morning. She had showered and dressed and walked to the office in the specific Boston early morning that smelled like cold air and the harbor, and the particular gray light of a city that did not soften itself for anyone's emotional state. She had made her decision on the walk. She was going to recuse herself from the case. The letter could not stay in her briefcase, and it could not be used professionally, and it could not be unfound, and the only path that remained, the only one that did not require her to either weaponize Nathan's family history or bury evidence of something he deserved to know, was to remove herself from the proceedings entirely and go to him directly. It would cost her professionally. She had calculated the cost on the walk and accepted it with the specific composure of someone who has done the arithmetic and decided the answer is correct regardless of what it requires. She turned the corner into the office corridor. She looked at her desk through the glass partition. Something was on it. Not her materials. She had locked those in her office cabinet the previous evening with the specific care of an attorney who understood that significant documents required secured custody. Not a filing from the junior team. It was 7:43 a.m. and her junior team arrived at 9. A single sheet of paper, printed, placed precisely in the center of her desk with a handwritten note attached by a paper clip. She pushed open the office door. She recognized the document immediately, Margaret's letter, printed from the Discovery Archive, the cream-embossed letterhead rendered in black and white, every word of it exactly as she had read it 4 times the previous evening. Someone had accessed the archive. Someone had printed it. Someone had placed it on her desk at some point between when she left last night and when she arrived this morning. She looked at the handwritten note. 7 words. He deserved to know, so did you. No signature. Sophie stood at her desk for a long moment. Then she looked through the glass partition across the open office floor to where Claire sat at her desk, Nathan's assistant, Margaret's selection, the woman Sophie had exchanged professional pleasantries with for 6 months without ever once looking at her the way she was looking at her now. Claire was typing. Her posture was professional and composed and entirely ordinary. Then, with the specific awareness of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment, she looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. Claire held Sophie's gaze for 3 seconds, not defiantly, not dramatically, simply the steady, specific gaze of someone who has done something they considered necessary and is prepared to stand in it without explanation. Then she looked back at her screen. Sophie sat down. She read the note again. 7 words that contained 3 years of observation, 18 months of a private document, 1 letter found in an archive and not deleted, and the specific moral courage of a woman who had been selected to manage a man's world, and had decided quietly and finally that managing it required telling him the truth about how it had been built. Sophie picked up her phone. She called her supervising partner at 8 a.m., early enough to communicate the seriousness, measured enough to communicate the control. "I need to recuse myself from Meridian," she said. The silence on the other end was the specific silence of a senior partner calculating professional cost at 8 in the morning, before his second coffee. "Sophie." "It's necessary," she said. "I'll brief my replacement fully. The case won't suffer." "You're the lead attorney." "I know what I am," she said. "I also know what I can't be in this proceeding. I'll have the transition materials ready by end of business." Another silence, longer. "This will be noted," he said, "not as a threat, as a fact." "I know," Sophie said. "Note it accurately." She hung up. She spent the next 6 hours preparing the most thorough case transition document of her professional career. Every filing, every strategy note, every deposition summary organized with the 3-highlighter precision she had developed in a Harvard library when she was 18 years old, and had understood that the work was always the thing she could control. At 4 p.m. she closed her laptop. She put the letter in her briefcase. She put on her coat. She walked out of the office building into the Boston afternoon and turned in the direction of Federal Street, and the building whose address she had known for 6 years, and whose 4th floor she was about to walk into as neither opposing counsel, nor Harvard student, nor the woman Margaret Cole had arranged a continent away. Simply as Sophie James, with a letter and 3 years of his life that belonged to him. Nathan's assistant, his other assistant, the one Margaret had not selected, told Sophie he was available. She had called ahead, not to prepare him. There was no preparation available for what was in her briefcase, but because arriving unannounced felt like the wrong register for what she was carrying. Margaret had arrived unannounced. Sophie had learned from that specific lesson what unannounced visits cost the person receiving them. She was shown to his office at 4:47 p.m. Nathan was standing at his window when she entered, the same Boston skyline, the same Federal Street view, the specific geography of a man who thought best on his feet and had spent 3 years thinking at this particular window about this particular city. He turned when she came in. His expression did not change. This was the thing about Nathan that had always undone her most specifically, not his confidence, not his intelligence, but the specific quality of his stillness. He was a man who received information without performing his reception of it. He had done it in Harvard seminars. He had done it across a boardroom table for 6 months. He was doing it now, looking at Sophie James standing in his office at 4:47 p.m. on a Wednesday with a briefcase and an expression he could not yet read. "Sophie," he said. "Nathan," she said, "I need to show you something." She did not sit. She crossed to his desk, his father's desk, now his, the desk she had heard about at Harvard and was standing beside for the first time, and opened her briefcase. She placed the letter on the surface between them, Margaret's personal stationery, the embossed letterhead, 3 years and 2 months old and as present as the Boston afternoon coming through the window. She stepped back. "Read it," she said. Nathan looked at her for a moment, then he looked at the letter, then he picked it up. Sophie watched him read. She had prepared herself for this, had rehearsed various versions of it on the walk from her office, had considered the range of possible responses, and organized them by probability the way she organized case outcomes. She had prepared for anger, for disbelief, for the specific cold shock of someone encountering betrayal in a familiar handwriting. She had not prepared for his stillness. Nathan read the letter with the complete motionless attention of a man who has been handed an answer to a question he stopped asking 3 years ago because the asking had become too expensive. His face did not perform the reading. His jaw did not set. His eyes did not change. He simply read line by line, paragraph by paragraph, his mother's careful, reasonable, devastating language moving through him with a quietness that was more painful to witness than any visible reaction would have been. He finished. He placed the letter back on the desk. He looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Sophie did not fill the silence. She had earned the capacity for silence over 3 years of London mornings and Boston boardrooms, and she used it now as the specific gift it was: space for a man to process something that required more room than conversation allowed. Then Nathan picked up his phone. He dialed. 2 rings. "Nathan," Margaret answered, warm, immediate, prepared in the specific way of someone who had been waiting for this call without knowing when it would arrive. "Did you arrange Sophie's London position?" Nathan said. Not a question. The specific grammatical register of someone who already knows the answer and is offering one final opportunity for truth before the conversation becomes something else entirely. The pause. Shorter than it should have been. "I helped facilitate an opportunity for a talented young woman," Margaret said carefully. "I don't think—" "Did you go to her apartment?" Nathan said. Another pause. Longer. The silence of a woman whose careful language has finally encountered a question it cannot reframe. "I thought I was doing what was best." "For who?" Nathan said. Margaret did not answer. Nathan looked at Sophie across the desk, while his mother's silence occupied the phone line between them. His dark eyes held hers with the specific expression of someone seeing something clearly for the first time that they had been looking at from the wrong angle for 3 years. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said to his mother. He hung up. He placed the phone on the desk beside the letter. The Boston afternoon had shifted, the light through the window now the specific gold of early evening. The city doing what cities did when the day moved toward its close, indifferent and spectacular, and completely unaware that something was resolving itself on the 4th floor of a Federal Street building that had always known whose name was on it. 3 years, Nathan said. 3 years, Sophie said. "I would have chosen you." The 4 words arrived not as declaration, but as fact, the specific statement of someone correcting the record rather than making a new one. Not "I choose you now." Not "I want to try again." The precise, painful, necessary acknowledgement of what had been true then and what 3 years of wrong information had cost them both. Sophie looked at him across his father's desk. "I know that now," she said. The office was very quiet. Outside the window, Boston continued its gold, indifferent evening. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to yet. They stayed in his office until the building emptied. Not by design. Simply, the conversation that followed the 4 sentences required more room than either of them had anticipated, and the evening hours provided it quietly and without interruption. The junior attorneys left at 6, the senior partners at 7. The cleaning staff moved through the corridors with the specific tactful efficiency of people who understood when a lit office at 8 p.m. meant leave it alone. Nathan and Sophie talked the way they had always talked. Without performance, without management, with the specific directness of 2 people who had built their entire connection on intellectual honesty, and were now applying that honesty to the most personal material either of them had ever handled. 3 years of a life constructed around a wrong explanation, rendered in full, examined without flinching. She told him about the visit. Every detail she had compressed into the word no when he had asked 3 years ago on a phone call that cost them everything. Margaret's tea, the card, the specific reasonable language that had made leaving feel like Sophie's own idea, because Margaret had needed it to feel that way and Sophie had been 20 years old, and had not yet developed the specific legal instinct for identifying when a framing was doing the work that a threat could not. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You protected me from it," he said. "I thought I was," Sophie said. "I was actually just afraid." "Of what?" She considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "That she was right," Sophie said. "Not about the clients or the image, about me. That I wasn't enough for what your life was going to require. I was 20 years old and she was very convincing, and I had spent 2 years in rooms I earned my way into wondering if earning your way in was the same as belonging." Nathan looked at her across his father's desk. "You were the only person in any room," he said quietly, "who ever made me feel like the room was worth being in." The office held that sentence for a moment. Then Sophie said, "Your mother is going to need time." "Yes," Nathan said. "So are you." "Yes." "So am I." He nodded, not as concession, as recognition, the specific acknowledgement of two adults who understand that resolution is not the same as restoration, and that what they were deciding to begin was not a return to something, but a construction of something new from materials that had been tested, and were therefore stronger than anything they could have built at 22 and 28 without the testing. Margaret Cole received Nathan's call the following morning. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Sophie was not present for it, and Nathan did not report it in detail. He said only that his mother understood that certain things had changed, and that other things were not going to be managed from her end going forward. His voice, when he said this, carried the specific weight of a son who loves his mother, and has also permanently redrawn the boundary between love and control. Sophie did not ask for more than that. She understood that Nathan's reckoning with Margaret was his, not hers to witness or direct or resolve. She had placed the letter on the desk. The conversation that followed was between a man and the woman who raised him, and the specific lifelong complexity of that relationship was not something a letter or a phone call or a 22-minute conversation fully resolved. Some things were still being processed. That was honest. Claire Watson received a personal visit from Sophie on a Thursday morning. Not at the office, at the coffee shop 2 blocks from Federal Street, where Claire ate lunch alone on Tuesdays and Thursdays with a book, and the specific quiet of someone who preferred her own company to the performed sociability of office lunch culture. Sophie sat across from her. "7 words," Sophie said. Claire looked at her book, and then at Sophie with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and had decided not to rehearse it. 18 months, Claire said. "I found the letter 18 months ago. I kept waiting for the right moment, and then I realized the right moment was not going to announce itself, and I needed to manufacture one." "Why didn't you go to Nathan directly?" Claire was quiet for a moment. "Because he needed to hear it from you," she said. "Not from his assistant, not from someone Margaret selected, from you, with the letter in your hand, in his office. That was the only version of the truth that was going to hold." Sophie looked at her. "You could have lost your position," Sophie said. "Yes," Claire said simply. She opened her book. The conversation was over. Sophie walked back to Federal Street, understanding that some people performed courage loudly, and some people performed it in 7 words on a printed note left on a desk at dawn, and both kinds were real, and the second kind was rarer. 3 months after the letter, Nathan and Sophie stood in his apartment. Not the Cole family home, not a corporate event, not a boardroom, his apartment, which was his and not his family's, with the specific quality of a space chosen by the person living in it rather than inherited from the people who came before. They were not the same people they had been at Harvard. This was not a loss. The people they had been at Harvard had loved each other with the specific intensity of youth, real, unguarded, built from genuine recognition across a library table. The people they were now had loved each other across 3 years of absence and wrong information, and a boardroom and a letter, and the specific adult courage of choosing something again with full knowledge of what choosing it cost. The second version was not lesser. It was load-bearing in a way the first had not yet had the opportunity to become. Sophie looked at Nathan in his apartment in the specific evening light of a Boston spring that had finally decided to commit to warmth, and felt something she had not felt since a Cambridge apartment and a business card, and a 20-year-old's fear that earning your way into a room was not the same as belonging. She felt like she belonged. Not because Nathan's world had changed to accommodate her. Because she had stopped requiring it to. There was one thing she had not yet asked him. She had thought about asking it on the walk from her office the day she carried the letter. She had thought about it in the elevator after the first boardroom meeting. She had thought about it during 6 months of depositions and document exchanges and professional composure maintained at considerable personal cost. She thought about it now. She decided to wait. Not from fear. She had diagnosed the difference between fear and patience at significant personal expense and was not going to confuse them again. From the specific understanding that some questions deserved the moment that was exactly right rather than the moment that was simply available. The right moment had not arrived yet. She believed it would.